Hi everyone, welcome to this special episode of SIS podcast series where we bring you insights from the world's top medical innovators. Today we are honored to have an internationally recognized inventor with over 140 US patents and groundbreaking contributions in vascular stents, intraocular lenses, and biomaterials that have changed the landscape of medicine. Estimates say that his inventions have saved or improved lives of over 1 billion souls in the world. Ladies and gentlemen and friends, I'm honored to host Dr. Leonard Pinchuk in this talk, winner of the 2012 Ross Prize from the US National Academy of Engineering, among many other prizes. The Ross Prize is considered as the Nobel Prize of Engineering, and it's an absolute pleasure to have Dr. Pinchuk with us. He'll be speaking at the Faculty of Medicine's 2025 Clinical Innovation Competition, and we are giving you a sneak peek into his world of innovation. Let's start from here. How would you introduce yourself? Len Pinchuk, the inventor, innovator, professor?
Well, first I want to thank you for inviting me to talk and for this interview. And I'm very flattered to do so. I don't really, and I never really considered myself as an inventor. It kind of happens retrospectively. And when people ask me what I do for a living, I say I'm one of the first biomedical engineers with that label, at least in the southern part of the United States right now. And then their next question is, what's a biomedical engineer? So then I would say, well, I work in the space between chemistry and engineering. What I like to do is to tailor or tweak polymers. Polymers are like plastics and materials to make them work in environments in the body. So then they'll ask me where I work, and I would say medical devices. And well, what have you done? So then I would say that I have just under 150 patents. When I was 33 years old, my first major patents were on the angioplasty balloon. And when they began to show a certain failure rate at 6 months, we put in these stents to keep the artery open. When that began to show failures, we put a drug in the stent. So it's always a series of making new inventions to make the devices work. So at that point, they begin to realize I'm an inventor. So at that point, I'll say, yeah, I guess I'm an inventor.
Oh, very nice, very nice. So angioplasty, drug-eluting stents, they are your first inventions, if I'm not mistaken?
They're the first major ones.
Right.
I was told I was the first student at the University of Miami, where I went to graduate school, to get a patent as a student. They didn't know how to handle it.
Yeah.
So that was my first patent.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other inventions that you do along the way that you don't even think of patenting.
Right. So going back to that time, what really sparked the idea of invention in you when you were thinking about clinical needs? What was the thought process behind that?
I've given a lot of thought to that, and I blame it on my father. My father was a successful businessman in the textile printing trade. But throughout his life, he painted about 1,000 paintings, and some of them are hanging at McGill. But he never really charged for them, and why did he do that? Well, he was an outputter, creative outputter, and his palette was oil paints. But, I began to realize that, people are really good musicians that don't get paid to play the piano or a guitar. And why do they do that? Or why do they write? Why do they make movies?
Yeah.
So you're born with a creative streak and an outputting streak. And it just so happens that my palette is in chemistry and engineering. So although the others are also inventors, you don't get patents for writing music or writing books or painting pictures. But in my field, you get patents. So when you have a patent, you're called an inventor. So I became an inventor because I had patents, but I didn't cognitively set out as an inventor. It just creating made me happy.
So the Your work is quite interdisciplinary. Many of your prizes was with groups of clinicians, interventionists. So this interdisciplinarity, was it something that was clear to you at the beginning, or it you saw this is necessary to find the clinical need? Or in other words, were you the one that found that those clinical needs, or you had a team?
I was very fortunate to take organic chemistry at McGill University with Professor David Harp. He was an amazing professor who predated PowerPoint, and he used two projectors to teach organic chemistry.
Right.
And for one of the first times in my life, I actually began to understand organic chemistry, and I did very well in it. So when I had made a decision, had an interview for med school, not to go to medical school, but to treat the disease, and not directly the patient.
Right.
So I wanted to work in the chemistry end, but I also grew up in my father's textile plant, building machinery and fixing machinery. So the engineering part didn't scare me. So the interviewer said, I know a program at the University of Miami where they're making an artificial heart and an artificial urinary bladder. They can really use a chemical guy, a polymer chemist. There were no polymer chemists in this part of the country. So 3 weeks later, I enrolled at the University of Miami. And my goal was to get my PhD interdisciplinary in engineering and chemistry. And that's where I began to be introduced to the medical device market and artificial organs.
Interesting. So there were links in your background from the textile and from the chemistry, and then they merged and they evolved over time that led to these inventions in biomaterials and medical device world. So you have just short of 150 issued patents, and I'm sure there's many other in the making. Was there a moment when you were working on one of these inventions with your groups that you thought, oh, this is going to change the world. This is going to be a big achievement?
Actually, that's a very good question, because the way they ask me that is, when was the eureka moment?
Right, yeah.
In my field, there isn't really a eureka moment. And the reason is, let's take the angioplasty balloon. So all of a sudden you have a balloon that's ends up being the best in the world. Right. And they try it in people, and you're going, first of all, you're sitting in the back room saying, are we going to kill the patient? Yeah. And the patient isn't killed, the patient survives, and you say, well, is angioplasty going to work with this? Right. So you wait a day, the patient's doing okay. You wait a week, you wait a month, then they say, well, let's see what happens at 6 months. And then the 6 months is where you begin to see those that work and those don't. But by now, the eureka moment is far gone. So you don't realize it's going to change things. It's only in retrospect, and it's after some of the fixes that, I remember my cardiologist maybe 20 years later saying, you have no idea how many lives you saved with this. And to tell you the truth, I never thought about it because I was on to different things, and that's where it hits you, is years later. It's not prospective. It's retrospective.
In anticipation of this talk, in the past couple of days, wherever I went, I basically looked around me, and it was really, really hard to find an individual that your inventions haven't touched their lives, saved a loved one. Myself, at least 2 of my near relatives are saved by your inventions, and I really appreciate your contributions. So among all these inventions that have become products, is there one that you can call your favorite, or the most impactful, or something that is different than others?
Yes, that's a great question. There is one that I'm very proud of, and I have to say it also stems from my love of organic chemistry, where I began to realize that a lot of materials used in the body slowly degrade And when they degrade, small molecules, come off of it, which attracts cells that encapsulate. And the goal of the body is to encapsulate the foreign body and push it out of the body. So one day I said, look at this polyurethane. As an organic chemist, I never have a urethane group in the body because water will cleave it. So I designed a new material, and it's called SIBS. I didn't know how to make it, and I found the inventor of SIBS was Dr. Joe Kennedy at the University of Akron, who, by the way, did a postdoc in McGill many years ago. So I went to his lab and I told him what I wanted, and he said, I made this 10 years ago, but I have no application for it. And I kind of, in my mind, said, you don't know what you have here. So I brought that back, and when there's no degradation, the foreign body reaction is very, very different. There really isn't one. So I remember when they put it in the eye to treat glaucoma, most of the time a capsule forms around it, and you can't move it. But this guy, after 1 year, said, I can take my finger and move the thing around, it was between the white of the eye and the conjunctiva, a clear layer over it. He says, there's no capsule. We've never seen that. So that opened the door to taming materials for use in the body. And the first real use of it was as a coating on coronary stents that released the drug paclitaxel. And that became one of the largest products in medical device history. And Boston Scientific took it to market. And in their first year alone, they did $3 billion in sales. Nothing's ever matched that. Wow. But it comes down to a basic material with a basic concept that came from Professor Harp at McGill University.
Yeah, a very interesting story. It's and quite impactful. A drug-eluting stents, and I would assume without this material, it was impossible at that point. Until that point.
It was difficult. Everyone else who tried to get into that market stopped because Boston Scientific dominated it. They got about 97% of the market.
Right.
And we then took that material as just a simple tube the size of an eyelash, so we can drain fluid from under the cornea to under the conjunctiva to stop glaucoma. And there's some great ophthalmologists, glaucoma surgeons in Canada who helped bring this on the market.
Wow.
Like Ahmed from Toronto, an amazing influencer worldwide. And now it's become the primary for advanced glaucoma around the world. And it comes back to this material that the body doesn't deem to be foreign.
Right. So in the process of getting these products out or making these innovations, transforming them into actual products, I would assume you have done strategic partnerships with big medtech and pharma companies. What is your advice to new innovators that are watching this episode and will hear your talk at our clinical innovation competition? What is the route to get there?
Well, first, let me just address that we end up being teams of people. Teams of engineers, scientists, chemists, so I don't work in a vacuum. I was fortunate to maybe have the spark that started the direction, but you have to get a lot of these people in. So what do I tell potential innovators? One, you have to be optimistic. You have to be persistent. You have to surround yourself with people in the know, not to isolate yourself. A good example is my first startup company where we invented the stent graft. Although I was the founder, I wasn't on the board of directors because my partner, who was a more sophisticated CEO, said that, Len, you're 33 years old. Nobody knows you. You can't raise money. Let me get seasoned people on the board who've done this before. So I got the inventor of the degradable suture on the board. And this guy kind of verified that my invention technically was going to work. So it's the same with younger inventors. Find people who have raised money with credibility. And these people will help you, if they endorse you, would help you raise the money. Also, you don't have to be first on the market. there's quite a lot of cases where if you do something better, let someone else blaze the trail through the woods. A good example, who invented toothpaste? You think it's Crest or Colgate, but no, it was Pepsodent. And you don't even hear of Pepsodent anymore. So some of my inventions too, I wasn't first on the market, but I knew where the flaws were. And we took the market very quickly.
So basically, perseverance and surrounding yourself with the people in the know, and you don't need to be the first in the market. You ought to be the best in the market. Learn from others. Is there in this learning process, is there any particular advice or a lesson that you learned over time that you may want to share with our viewers so that they don't repeat the same mistake?
Yes, one, don't burn bridges behind you. You never know when you have to go back to your previous job. So you have to have your downside protected. And that gives you confidence, especially if you're raising a family.
Right.
You get two things out of a job. One is your salary, and the second is your reputation. Concentrate on your reputation. I know that I never said no when people would ask me if I would help them do something, because if you have a skill set that's different. Right. I was reminded when I was in my mid-20s that I was the one who told one of the major eye institutes in the world that you can replace the vitreous humor in the eye with silicone, and they adopted that. I don't even remember telling him, but the guy's never forgotten it. And this led to me working in glaucoma 20 years later. So this networking is important. If you can publish, get your name out there. There are many opportunities to talk at adventure summits. And in fact, the CLIC is kind of like that too. Get your name out there, talk about it. And it sometimes takes waves. And a lot of investors like to see it when they come back and get an update. And eventually they said, I've heard him talk or her talk 3 or 4 times. Maybe it's time we put the money in it. Also, I found some things are difficult. It's nice if you can hold up your product so a venture capitalist can see it. You can't quite do that when you're in drug discovery. Right. But if you have the ability to show something, it's good to be able to show it.
So sometimes we hear about minimum viable product and working prototypes, functional prototypes. I would assume you're referring to that stage, and at very early stages, just get a minimum viable product out in the hands of potential investors.
Yeah, you can use the thing. It's good enough to show. Maybe you're not ready to implant it yet, but good enough to show that looks like we're going to make this work.
You alluded to the fact that the clinical innovation competition is one of the events that can get early innovators names out. Without giving too much out, would you shed light a little bit on your talk in anticipation of your talk at the clinical innovation competition?
Yeah, my talk is it's titled The Three-Legged Stool of Innovation. And why three-legged stool? Because I remember when I became a professional engineer, one of the engineers said, a design constraint, three-legged stool never wobbles. Think about that when you design.
Right.
And I was thinking of of what's important in innovation. And one is they don't come out of the blue. A good example is Orville Wright from the Wright brothers was given a helicopter when he was 8 years old. Right. But these are the guys who made it work for everyday use. Then you get the Edisons you got to persevere, and not all, very few inventions, maybe less than 5% come from basic science. It comes from tinkering. Right. Don't be afraid to tinker. And the third has to do with your disposition to be an outputter. When I interview people and I ask, what do you do at night? And they say, I don't know, either Netflix or Hulu. I would say, well, that's not an R&D engineer. That'll be a very good quality assurance engineer who takes in information. But you like to hear people who just don't sit still, and they like to output. And these are the three legs that I like to balance when certainly when I interview people for jobs. It tells me kind of what their disposition is and their chances of creating.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Pinchuk. It was an incredible chat with you. All short, but we were very much looking forward to having you in Montreal once again and hosting your talk at the Clinical Innovation Competition this year. Appreciate you taking the time and speaking with us in this chat.
Well, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Bartlett, for inviting me to give the talk. I'm looking forward to it.